On today's show, how good is the other Norwegian in the 2024 NHL draft? We'll look at Stian Solberg on today's episode of Locked On NHL Prospects.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this podcast, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday to Friday. I'm Hattie Kalikesh, Director of North American Scouting for Dobber Prospects, joined by Sebastian High, Head Scout and Director of European Scouting for Dobber Prospects. And on today's show, we'll be breaking down the prospect profile for Stian Solberg, the other Norwegian for the 2024 NHL Draft. We'll start off with the profile, the puck skills, and the skating in our first segment. In our second segment, we'll look at the more intricate stuff, the toolkit, the habits, the decision making. And in our final segment, we'll talk about the projection, the upside, and which team would be the best NHL fit for Stian Solberg. Before we get into any of that, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe. Leave us a comment letting us know what you want us to talk about next. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, make sure to leave us a rating review and make sure to make us your first listen of the day. So, Sebastian, let's get things started here. You're the Director of European Scouting. You've watched Solberg a lot more than I have, but I've watched a decent amount of his, especially his recent playoff run. Talk me through the profile, size, handedness, what team he's placed for, and how many points he has this year.
Yeah, so Stian Solberg is a violent left shot defenseman. He is 6'2", 201 pounds. He's a December 29th, 05 birthday, and he plays for, oh, please, the pronunciation is going to be rough here. My Norwegian is a bit rusty, but Vålerenga? Thank you.
Yeah.
You should have led with this. You should have led with this segment. Thank you. And in 45 games, he's logged 5 goals and 15 points. But in this playoff run through 12 games, he has 2 goals and 6 points. So the production certainly taken a bit of a leap here in the postseason. And one of those goals was just absolutely unbelievable end-to-end rush, dangling through the defensive core and finishing just over the shoulder on short side with very little room to get his shot off. It was a beautiful goal, and he's certainly been showing off his handling ability in flashes, but that has been far from his biggest strength. That he is very much a violent defensive defenseman first and foremost, but there's been these flashes of on-puck upside that we're going to delve into in this first segment with the puck skills. So let's start off with that, the handling skill. It has been far from his biggest strength consistently over the course of the season, but there have been these bright flashes, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I especially like the way that his handling works at high speeds. You know, he's really good at accelerating while keeping the puck close to him. He keeps the puck on the heel of his stick, and he's really good at going back and forth at those top speeds, which makes him really elusive and difficult to handle in transition plays when he does decide to handle the puck and move forward. And again, it's in flashes, it's not consistent, but there's some decent foundations there to kind of improve his game. Usually with defensemen, you see them handle the puck a lot better, kind of off the boards, making a quick touch and making a pass, for example, on their backhand along the boards, that kind of thing. But with Solberg, the open ice, high speed handling has been pretty interesting. I'd actually give his handling an average grade. It gives a 5 overall. I think that, you know, in his defensive zone, sometimes he'll bobble a puck. His puck catching abilities and his puck receptions aren't ideal. He doesn't really cradle pucks as well off receptions, but once he has them settled, it's actually not bad. There have been flashes of 6.5 level handling skill, but there's also been flashes of 3.5 level handling skill. So it's kind of a mixed bag, but for me overall, it's been a pretty average tool in this game. To call that one of the weaker elements of his skills is pretty interesting. It means there's a lot to work with here. But talk me through the shot with Solberg, because I think that's not bad either, right?
Not at all. I'd give it like a 5.5 grade, maybe. It is really violent, very powerful. He has a very, very hard shot. Definitely a threat from the blue line to at least get dangerous pucks towards the net. Perhaps not to like score directly from the blue line, but he's always looking for tipping threats and screens. And it is such a violent slap shot specifically from the blue line that he can create chaos, especially again, it's like pretty weak professional competition in that Norwegian Pro League. It has been a threat over the course of the season to just create some confusion. But even his wrist shot, which I think was especially on display at the World Junior Championship, there's a decent amount of power behind it. None of his shooting toolkit is really renowned for accuracy per se. Like it is a little bit erratic at times, and he's definitely had a couple of violent shots go like way high or way off. But when he gets them on net, they're hard, heavy, difficult to handle for goaltenders. And as long as he works a little bit on reining it in a little bit and focusing a bit more on the accuracy, I think his shot selection as a whole is quite sound. He's not one to just spam shots from the blue line blindly. He waits for the right time, the right moment. He can change his angle at the last second to get the puck to a slightly stronger shooting lane. There's a couple sound habits there in his shooting toolkit. You can see him move up into that high and mid slot to get slightly more dangerous shooting opportunities for himself. And yeah, I think as a whole, it is like about average, but there have been flashes of above average. And I think there's a decent amount of room to grow with him, which I think is kind of like the name of the game with Solberg, is that there's a foundation of really intriguing things overall on both sides of the puck, with and without the puck on his stick. But there's a lot of room to grow in most areas of his game. And that's what makes him such an intriguing prospect in this draft class.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's the main aspect of it. There's a definite. I think there's a step down between the offensive puck skills, for example, and versus the defensive ability, the defensive skills, the defensive habits, especially. I think are a big step ahead of the puck skills. But yeah, I also want to talk about the passing ability because he plays small give and goes at times, but I don't see much outside of that. He's a player who's pretty linear in his tendency to just be a threat from the blue line. He's not the type of player to advance into the offensive zone. He's good at getting into the offensive zone, but once he gets there, I see him mostly kind of hang around the blue line, make plays from there. And again, the occasional give and go down the boards, but nothing more than that. Not a very exploratory playmaker. So I'd give
Yeah.
him kind of a 4.5 on passing personally.
Yeah.
But
Like
that's
like
more, yeah,
around there, like I think like one of the limiting factors there is that he doesn't have a very versatile passing toolkit. Like he doesn't really
yeah.
implement like hook passes or anything interesting in his passing game. And as you mentioned, there's very little exploration in terms of playmaking and trying to activate along the boards to get pucks towards the slot. It's very much give and goes, like trying to get pucks like towards like forwards along the boards, like lower down in the offensive zone and letting them do the creating. But yeah, it's kind of meat and potatoes from the passing side of the game with Solberg.
For sure. Last but not least, the skating ability. I think this is quite decent in my viewings of Solberg.
Yeah,
Like he's a good mover for his size. The mechanics are good. The power behind each stride is good. He covers a lot of ice, and uses it in a way that just, I mean, it makes it so hard to try and create off his side. Like he's just so punishing. So yeah, I'd give his skating a good 6.5. Like it's a bona fide strength of his game. Would you agree?
for sure. I think I'd lean a little bit closer to 6, but as you mentioned, he's also quite agile. Like there's a lot to like with the skating. I think there's a lot of room to grow. I think that there's still like it's difficult for me to give him a 6.5 grade because I still think that there's a lot of like decision making woes in terms of how to leverage the skating to create advantages, and that
Yeah.
limits him a little bit in leveraging it as a really high end tool. But it is well above average, and again, just like every other aspect of his game, there's a lot of room to grow there as well.
For sure. But that wraps it up for our first segment where we talk about the puck skills, the skating, and the profile for Stian Solberg. We'll get into the second segment where we talk about the toolkit, the habits, the decision making, all that more intricate stuff in Solberg's game. We'll get into that in just a second after these messages from our sponsors at Game Time. If you're looking for cheap tickets last minute to any event, Game Time is the best place to secure them. Game Time is a great source for last minute tickets, not just for sports, but for any event, whether that's comedy, theater, any game in your area, regardless of what it is, anything that requires tickets. Game Time is a great source of obtaining those tickets. They got a bunch of deals to help you save money as well. You can customize your spot quite easily. They have last minute deals as well. So you can save up to 60% off buying last minute tickets for sports, concert, comedy, theater, and more. They also have flash deals, which help you save even more with exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game or the event. And the Game Time guarantee makes sure that you always get the best price. If you find a ticket in the same section and row for less than what Game Time has to offer, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNHL at checkout for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply, but again, super simple. You just create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. So download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Alrighty, so second segment here, we're going to be talking about the more intricate stuff in Stian Solberg's game. We'll start off with the toolkit here. So how his tools interact. We already alluded to it a bit in the first segment. The skating and stick handling combine really well. He's really good at keeping control of the puck at high speeds, making plays at high speeds, which is quite unique for a player this profile, right? Like this isn't the type of skill we usually see from a big defensive, physical defenseman. But it's a quite interesting aspect of his game, right?
It certainly is. It's one of the things that makes him such a unique player in terms of profile too, right? But like I think as you were alluding to, it is like the violent defensive play that makes him so projectable to the NHL style of game. But having all of these alternative strengths in his game and to diversify his potential impact makes him so intriguing, and I think gives him a really wide range of potential outcomes at the NHL level. Like there's definite second pairing upside here, even though I think that the most likely outcome is a third pairing presence. But yeah, like I think a lot of the tools like interact really nicely. I think like the physicality and skating would be one of like the main components there that just interact incredibly fluidly. He is so violent and like especially in terms of being a high-end rush defender, he's able to combine that mobility and the physicality to really devastating ends. And he showed that off especially at the World Junior Championship, where he was putting up like incredible results on the weakest team in the tournament as their like number one defenseman playing half of the minutes on the ice. He's playing like 30 minutes a game as a 17-year-old at that stage. So yeah, he's been very impressive in those flashes. And yeah, I think like the physicality specifically is like probably the strongest tool in his entire toolkit, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's by far. I mean, it's ridiculous how violent this kid is. I mean, he's just extremely punishing off the rush, especially. You don't want to go down the side of the ice, and that actually, I mean, you can see it in game. And I mean, obviously, it's Norwegian pro competition, which isn't the highest level of pro competition. I'd say it's even the lowest level of pro competition among the ones that we've scouted. Among the draft eligibles that play pro. But still, I mean, he's affecting the way that pro players play on the ice just by how violent he is. Teams actually avoid his side of the ice because they know it's going to be hell to go against. So it's so interesting to watch him go about it. But it doesn't limit itself to his in zone to his rush defending. It's also in zone. He's really proactive when it comes to leaving the slot and going, for example, behind the net to intercept a player, just pummel them into the boards and get away with it with the puck, or same thing along the boards, along the sides of the ice. He's really good at closing that gap between the net front and the boards, whether that's the left side or the right side. 3 strides, he's in your face, he's pushing you into the boards, he's getting off the ball with the puck and making a play. So just a really violent, really projectable, really mature defenseman in his own zone. Usually with players like this, they'll take themselves out of position very, very frequently making these plays when they're that physical and that willing to be violent. But I haven't seen that as often with Solberg. It's still there. I think it's still an element of his game, but it's not nearly as frequent as, for example, a Carter Yakimchuk or, players in a similar mold where they're really athletic, really physical, really, with great skating and are able to close those gaps. But all of a sudden they're leaving a 2-on-1 behind them. Wouldn't you agree?
I would say that I've seen him be overly aggressive quite frequently over the course of the season, but one of the reasons it just hasn't come back to bite him is that he is such a great skater, and when he does go for those riskier, aggressive like pinches to try to like close the blue line or whatever it may be, he does so with the awareness that he's not going to put his entire body weight behind it, that if he ends up being compromised, he can quite quickly pivot back and make back and get back and at least get his stick back into a lane and pester a player that's not a clean 2-on-1 going back the other way. And he's really able to leverage his reach, but also his mobility in those situations.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a really interesting part of his game there. In terms of the defensive ability and the decision making defensively, you alluded to it a bit with the over aggression. Uh, I see it; it's still existent, but in the games I've watched, like there is still a level of composure with him on the puck. I think that sometimes he does make a wrong decision. For example, on the breakout, kind of gets pigeonholed into one specific pass that he wants to make. It doesn't really matter what's in front of him. He doesn't really adjust or adapt based on the circumstances. That's one element that I've seen in this game that kind of concerns me a bit, because a lot of modern NHL defending is being able to manage breakouts, being able to adapt on the fly, making the right pass off the breakout, and facilitating rush offense, because rush offense is an increasingly growing part of the NHL game, right?
Certainly, and he's so good at shutting down rushes going in his direction, right? Like he's a really effective rush defender with his toolkit and his aggression. But his breakout game is certainly an area of weakness. Like I would say, like the breakout passing is something that if I were drafting him, I would be immediately putting a significant focus on. As you mentioned, he can pigeonhole himself into a specific like option and just try to force it and not really look for alternatives after he's like made up his mind that he wants to make that play. There are moments in the breakout where his scanning habits falter when he's under pressure,
Yeah.
and he also can like try to force plays rather than circling back and just retaining possession, trying again, giving the breakout a second attempt without risking possession loss. So there's definitely areas to mature in his breakout game. I think that, as you mentioned, it's an area that needs a decent amount of refining before he makes the NHL. But at the same time, like the handling skill is a positive. The mobility helps him being able to really access a variety of passing lanes, and integrating some more lateral motion in his breakout game, I think, would also help him a lot in opening up a lot more options more openly, rather than enticing him to just pigeonhole himself into that one passing choice.
For sure. I think that's a definite area of weakness in his game. In terms of habits as well, there are some elements in his shooting decision making that I think are pretty strange. He's a player who, I mean, he spams shot from the blue line. I've never honestly seen him take a shot other than that beautiful goalie score. And I don't think I've seen him take a single shot from below the hash marks or within the slot. Like he's a player who,
No.
yeah, like very frequently will take shots from the outside. But it's also the fact that I oftentimes see him shoot the puck to get rid of it. So I think on the puck, there's a lack of composure. There's a lack of poise when it comes to getting pucks in the offensive zone and making plays under pressure, which is another part of his game that you would like to see him improve. Which I think a scouting team should also put an immediate focus on is, take your time on the puck. Let plays develop. Hang on to pucks as much as you need to, but not more. There's an art to it. You look at players like, in the offensive zone, for example, I look at Jakub Slavin. He's a player who's a perfect example of that. He's not an offensive dynamo by any means, but he hangs on to pucks for just the right amount of time. He takes pucks off the wall, makes a play towards the middle. You don't have to be an offensive genius like a Quinn Hughes or a Lane Hudson, for example. You don't need to do all that, but just hanging on to pucks for just the right amount of time, making the right plays, taking the right decisions in the offensive zone is key, and I would love to see Stian Solberg develop those elements even further. But that actually is up for our second segment. We'll get into the third, where we talk about our projection for Stian Solberg, what we think his upside is, and which team would be the best fit for him. We'll get into that in a second, right after these messages from our sponsors, a new sponsor at Monopoly Go. We have all been there, either as a player or a fan. It's the second intermission, and the scoreboard is not looking good. You're feeling low. You're not sure if your team can pull out a win. And that's when you dig deep. You lift your head up and you say to yourself, it's time to get back in the game, pull off some bank heists, and take as much of my friends' money as I possibly can. That's right. The smash hit mobile game Monopoly Go lets you compete with your friends to get the most riches and the biggest empire. It's a Monopoly you love, but on your phone anytime with tons of new twists, including leaderboards to compare your progress with your buddies. There's so much to do. You can play on countless dynamic Monopoly boards. You can make your friends bankrupt by smashing their landmarks with a wrecking ball, and you can charge other players rent for your iconic properties. You can even work with your friends to crack open community chests and in tournaments to get extra rewards to help you climb the leaderboard. So get back out there, put on your game face, and download Monopoly Go now free on the App Store or Google Play. Alrighty, so closing things off here with our final segment, we'll look at the projection, the upside, and which team would be the best fit for Stian Solberg, the towering left-handed defenseman, playing in Norway this season. We'll start off with the projection. I feel like it's a pretty safe projection. I don't see many scenarios where Solberg doesn't end up as at the very least, a number 6 defenseman, maybe perhaps a number 7. I think that's the worst case scenario if really nothing in his game improves. But there's room for improvement, and there's still some exploration in his handling game, which I think could translate to playmaking and goal scoring exploration for him from the blue line. What would you say his kind of average projection is? So
I would say my average projection would be as a solid, reliable number 5 defenseman. I think, especially if he's drafted by a contending team that wants to mold him into that style of play within like 2.5 years time, I could really see that being the course of action with him. There's definite areas of exploration, as you mentioned, that could unlock more intriguing offensive potential, but I think a lot would have to break right for that to translate to like a real consistent second pairing role. But that said, like the defensive violence, the also versatility in his game of and being able to leverage his mobility and handling skill offensively makes him so adaptable as well, and being able to play up the lineup in case of injuries. But I would say number 5 would be my comfortable projection at this stage.
I would agree. I would say though, I think the second pair potential is, even though it's not the average, I would say projection, it's more likely. It's not like a 5% chance that he'll become a second pair defenseman. I think it's
No. Like
there,
30,
yeah,
25, 30. Yeah.
yeah. Like I think there's a still decent amount of chance that he ends up being a second pair defenseman. I could see a clear path to it, especially as an insulator, as a defenseman who uplifts the
Yes.
game of a more offensive, an offensive piece, which makes you think of a team like the Carolina Hurricanes. You know, with Scott Morrow in the ranks in the future, moving forward, I could very much see a team like the Carolina Hurricanes take a swing on him in the second, maybe even third round if he slips, and really running away with that. I think that with Solberg, there's a clear path to him becoming kind of that bona fide defensive defenseman on a pair with a more offensive piece. And him and Scott Morrow, I feel like, are great complements to each other in terms of how they would benefit each other in game. Would you see the Hurricanes picking him up, and also how good would the pairing be with Scott Morrow? Do you see a fit there?
I think it'd be an excellent pairing in terms of stylistic matches. At the same time, I do think that the Hurricanes are probably going to keep their draft picks for their super high, obscure upside picks, as they typically do. But that said, like they could certainly use another one of these like more physical defensive defensemen, because like the Brett Pesci's and Jacob Slavins of the world aren't going to be playing forever, and I'm sure they're going to want to have
Yeah.
the next generation of that stylistic type of player, especially on the left side, in their system. That said, I could easily see like one of like the more nitty gritty Western teams looking at a player like Solberg, like whether it be like the LA Kings, for example, or even I think the Vancouver Canucks could be interested in a player of this mold. I'm not sure
Yeah.
where the Canucks picks are this season, but Solberg is likely going to be available anywhere between like 20th overall and like 50th overall is likely range at the end of the day, with his toolkit and the projectability of his game to the NHL style. But yeah, are there any other organizations that pop into mind for you right away?
There's one that pops in immediately, and it's the St. Louis Blues. I think that
Oh
they
yeah.
would
Oh
lap
yeah.
this player up. It's not even like he's exactly what they look for in their defenseman. Big, physical, violent, intelligent rush defender, and just chaotic enough to pull off something wild occasionally. Very much a St. Louis Blues pick. I could also see the Washington Capitals go for him. Their defense prospect pool is looking a bit shallow, and I think that if he's available around the 45 range where they're picking in the second round, definite swing on him coming. I think the Philadelphia Flyers could be another bet. They're always looking for defensemen, and I think that him long term in Philadelphia would be a great fit. It's kind of a return to that Broad Street Bullies mentality that really sold the Flyers in Philly to their fan base. I think would be a great option there as well. So yeah, between St. Louis, Philly, and Washington, I think you have got three teams in the mid range of the rounds that could take a decent swing at this player and come away pretty happy with their pick. But that is obviously contingent on them slipping into the 40s. If we're looking at a late first rounder, you mentioned Vegas. Well, you haven't mentioned Vegas, but I think that Vegas would be a great fit
Oh
as
yeah.
well. Um, and he's really a contender's pick. He's a player who's going to be ready soon, and is going to be kind of a plug and play player. So when you have a set defense, he's a great option for your team. Which is why I threw Carolina out there, because I could see them taking a lower potential swing with their first round pick, but a player who will definitely be there soon and help them soon. But if we're looking at teams that are, outside of Carolina, Colorado could go for him. The Flyers have another pick at 27, which I think would maximize the chances that it ends up being Philly, but we'll see. But what do you think about Montreal potentially picking him up with a Winnipeg pick? That's too early, right?
I mean, another left shot defenseman in Montreal. I think the fan base would implode, but it would fit
Yeah,
stylistically with a bunch of players that the Habs have, right? Like whether it be Logan Mailloux or Justin Barron or Lane Hudson, like the list goes on of players who could use that insulation and who could offer that breakout skill as well to kind of
yeah,
compensate for Solberg's lackings. But I think that like taking a left shot defenseman in the first round would not be the most popular decision with the Montreal fan
yeah,
base. And especially with the need for more dynamic offensive skill, going for a left shot defenseman who's mainly a bruiser as is currently constructed, with the offense being more theoretical than anything else at this stage. Yeah, I mean, it'd be fascinating. I think I would chuckle if I saw it happen. It'd be entertaining, and I
yeah.
think he'd quickly be like a fan favorite type of defenseman in Montreal. But I think it'd be more likely he ends up with one of those other organizations that you mentioned, or maybe even like the New York Islanders, for instance.
Yeah, I could also see the Calgary Flames go for him. They have the 29th pick in the draft, and they also have a couple of second rounders that they added in. So there's a lot of opportunities for them to add one of the add Stian Solberg with one of these pieces. But that wraps things up for today's show. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe. Leave us a comment letting us know what you want us to talk about next. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, make sure to make us your first listen of the day. For your second listen of the day, make sure to check out Locked On Sports Today. They've got all your news and updates about what's going on around sports. And make sure to tune in for our next show as we continue our prospects coverage for the month of April. This has been Hattie Kalakash with Sebastian High, and we hope you tune in next time.